The scream echoed across the rolling plains as Rebecca Zimmerman's world plunged into darkness. One moment, she had been drawing water at the old well on the edge of her father's property, and the next, the wooden platform beneath her feet had given way, sending her plummeting down into the cold, damp depths below. It was the summer of 1876 in Dry Creek, Nevada, a small settlement that had sprung up following the silver discoveries in the eastern part of the state. Rebecca had just celebrated her 22nd birthday the previous week, a modest affair with her father and younger brother in their humble homestead. She had worn her best dress, the pale blue one with delicate lace trim that her late mother had sewn for her before passing 3 winters prior. That same dress now clung to her body, wet and soiled from the fall. "Help!" Rebecca's voice bounced off the moss-covered stone walls surrounding her. "Is anybody there? Please help me." The circle of daylight above seemed impossibly distant. She had fallen perhaps 20 feet, landing in a shallow pool of water that had cushioned her fall just enough to prevent serious injury. Her right ankle throbbed painfully, likely sprained, and various scrapes and bruises covered her arms and legs. But she was alive, and for that she said a quick prayer of thanks. Rebecca's father and brother had left 3 days earlier for Carson City to purchase supplies and wouldn't return for at least another 4 days. The nearest neighbor was the Sullivan family, but their homestead was over 3 miles away, and they rarely ventured in the direction of the Zimmerman property. As the initial shock subsided, Rebecca assessed her situation. The well was about 8 feet in diameter, with slick stone walls offering no footholds. The water at the bottom was only about 2 feet deep, enough to soak her dress but not pose a drowning hazard. Some old debris floated on the surface, rotted wood fragments from the platform that had given way beneath her. "Think, Rebecca," she whispered to herself, trying to keep panic at bay. "Someone will come looking for you, eventually." The sunlight filtering down from above began to dim as the afternoon waned. Rebecca continued to call for help periodically, but her voice grew hoarse, and she began to accept that no immediate rescue was forthcoming. The temperature dropped as night approached, and she shivered in her wet clothing, huddling against the wall in the small area above the waterline. Her thoughts drifted to the stories her father told about the old well. It had been on the property when they purchased the land 4 years ago, but they had built a new well closer to the house for daily use. This one was kept as an emergency backup during drought seasons. No one had drawn water from it in over a year, which explained the rotted platform. As darkness fell completely, Rebecca could see a small patch of stars through the circular opening above. She thought about her mother, wondering if she was looking down on her now. "I'm not ready to join you yet, Mama," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Not like this." The first night was the hardest. Sleep came in brief, uncomfortable snatches, interrupted by the cold and the strange sounds that echoed down the well shaft, the hooting of owls, the distant howl of coyotes, and the rustling of night creatures above. By morning, Rebecca was exhausted, hungry, and desperately thirsty. Despite being surrounded by water, she dared not drink. The second day brought renewed determination. Rebecca tore strips from her petticoat and attempted to fashion a rope, but the fabric was too weak and too short to be of any real use. She tried to create footholds in the wall using a sharp piece of debris, but succeeded only in bloodying her fingers. The sun passed directly over the well around midday, briefly illuminating her prison before beginning its descent and leaving her again in growing shadows. "Please," she prayed aloud as the second day waned, "send someone to find me. Anyone." Miles away, Ethan O'Malley guided his horse across the rugged terrain of eastern Nevada. At 31, He'd spent more than half his life working cattle, first in Texas, then gradually making his way northwest. He had a reputation as a skilled horseman and an even better tracker, having learned from the Comanche during his youth in Texas. Ethan wasn't what most people expected when they heard the word cowboy. While he was certainly capable with a gun and comfortable in the saddle, he preferred reading philosophy by firelight and carried a small collection of books in his saddlebags. His weathered face bore the marks of years under the harsh sun, but his eyes remained bright and observant, missing little of the world around him. He had been hired by a cattle operation near Carson City and was making his way to report for work, taking his time and enjoying the solitude of the journey. As the sun began to set on what had been a pleasant day of riding, Ethan decided to make camp near a small rise that would provide some shelter from the wind. After securing his horse, Clementine, and preparing a modest dinner of beans and jerky, Ethan settled by his small fire and opened a dog-eared copy of Emerson's essays. He had read no more than 2 pages when Clementine snorted and tossed her head, ears pricked forward. "What is it, girl?" Ethan closed his book and rose, hand instinctively moving to the revolver on his hip. Clementine wasn't easily spooked, and he trusted her instincts. The night was quiet save for the usual sounds of the wilderness. Then, carried on the evening breeze, came what sounded like a faint human cry. Ethan froze, listening intently. There it was again, distant, weak, but unmistakably a woman's voice. "Hello," he called out, his deep voice carrying across the landscape. "Is someone there?" No response came, and Ethan began to wonder if he'd imagined it. But Clementine remained alert, facing the direction from which the sound had come. Deciding it was worth investigating, Ethan gathered his rifle, mounted his horse, and rode toward what appeared to be a homestead in the distance, barely visible in the fading light. As he approached, the cries became more distinct. He followed the sound, which led him not to the modest house visible on the property, but to an old well some distance away. Dismounting cautiously, Ethan approached the well, noting the broken platform and the disturbed earth around its edge. "Hello," he called down into the darkness. "Is someone down there?" The silence that followed was so profound that Ethan feared he'd been mistaken after all. Then came a voice, weak and hoarse. "Yes, please help me. I've been down here for 2 days." Rebecca could hardly believe her ears when the deep, masculine voice called down from above. After 2 days of silence broken only by her increasingly hopeless cries for help, the sound of another human being nearly brought her to tears. "My name is Ethan O'Malley," the voice continued. "I'm going to get you out of there, miss. Are you hurt?" "My ankle," Rebecca called up, her voice cracking. "I think it's sprained, and I'm cold and thirsty, but otherwise, I'm alive." "That's the important part," came the reassuring reply. "What's your name?" "Rebecca Zimmerman." "This is my father's property. He's away in Carson City." "Well, Miss Zimmerman, I need to fetch some supplies from my camp and find a rope. I'll be back as quick as I can. Will you be all right for a few more minutes?" "I've managed 2 days, Mr. O'Malley," Rebecca said with a weak laugh that turned into a cough. "I suppose I can manage a few more minutes." True to his word, Ethan returned quickly. Rebecca heard the sounds of movement above, then saw the glow of a lantern being lowered into the well. The light nearly blinded her after so long in darkness, but it was the most welcome sight she'd ever seen. "I've tied a water canteen to the rope first," Ethan called down. "I want you to drink slowly, just small sips at first." Rebecca reached for the canteen with trembling hands, unscrewed the cap, and took a cautious sip. The water was cool and sweet, and she had to force herself not to gulp it down. "Now," Ethan continued, "I'm going to come down. I've secured the rope to my saddle and my horse knows to stand steady. When I reach you, I'll help you into a sling I've made and we'll get you up." Rebecca watched as the tall figure began his descent, moving with surprising grace for a man his size. When his boots touched the water at the bottom of the well, she got her first clear look at her rescuer. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a strong jawline partially covered by a neatly trimmed beard. His eyes, visible in the lantern light, were a warm hazel that regarded her with concern. "Miss Zimmerman," he said softly, tipping his hat as if they were meeting at a social gathering rather than the bottom of a well. "Let's get you home." Ethan assessed Rebecca's condition quickly, noting her injured ankle and the way she shivered despite the relatively mild temperature. He removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders, then reached into a small pouch at his belt and produced a piece of jerky. "Eat this slowly," he instructed. "You need strength for the journey up." As Rebecca nibbled on the tough dried meat, Ethan adjusted the rope he'd brought down, creating a sling that would support her weight. "I'm going to lift you into this," he explained. "And then I'll secure you so you won't fall. Once you're safely up, I'll climb up after you." Rebecca nodded, suddenly shy in the presence of this calm, capable stranger. "How did you find me?" she asked as he worked. "Your voice carried on the wind," Ethan replied simply, "and my horse has good ears." With gentle efficiency, Ethan lifted Rebecca into the improvised harness, careful of her injured ankle. His hands were strong but gentle, and despite her discomfort and exhaustion, Rebecca felt a curious flutter in her chest at his touch. "Hold tight," he instructed, securing the last knot. "And don't worry, I won't let you fall." With that promise, Ethan gave a signal tug on the rope, and Rebecca felt herself being slowly lifted toward the circle of starlight above. The ascent seemed to take forever, the rope turning slightly as she rose, but finally, wonderfully, she emerged from the well into the cool night air. Once she was safely on solid ground, Ethan climbed up after her with surprising agility. He quickly untied her from the harness and helped her to a more comfortable position, propping her back against his saddle, which he'd removed from Clementine. In the full moonlight, Rebecca got a better look at her rescuer. His clothes were travel-worn but well-kept, his movements those of a man accustomed to hard work and self-reliance. He had a kind face, she decided, the kind that inspired trust. "Thank you," she said simply, the words wholly inadequate for what she felt. Ethan nodded, already examining her injured ankle with practiced hands. "It's swollen but doesn't appear broken," he said. "Still, you shouldn't put weight on it. Is your house that one I can see yonder?" Rebecca nodded. "About half a mile from here." "Then that's where we're headed." "I'll get you settled, then come back for my gear." He helped her drink more water, then carefully lifted her onto Clementine's back, mounting behind her and keeping one strong arm around her waist to steady her. The short ride to the Zimmerman homestead passed in silence, Rebecca too overwhelmed by her ordeal and rescue to make conversation, and Ethan seemingly comfortable with the quiet. When they reached the small but well-maintained house, he helped her down and carried her to the porch. "Key?" he asked simply. "Under the third pot," Rebecca directed, gesturing to the row of plant containers her mother had lovingly arranged years ago, now tended by Rebecca's own hands. Ethan retrieved the key, opened the door, and carried Rebecca inside, setting her gently on a chair in what appeared to be the main living area. "I'll need to tend to that ankle," he said, lighting a lamp that sat on a nearby table. "And you should get out of those damp clothes. I'll fetch my medical supplies and give you privacy to change." Before Rebecca could respond, Ethan had stepped back outside, closing the door behind him. Left alone, she sat in stunned silence for a moment, then began the difficult task of removing her sodden, filthy dress. By the time Ethan returned, she had managed to change into a simple nightgown and robe, her hair still a tangled mess but her body at least dry and warm. Ethan knocked before entering, carrying his saddlebags and the rest of his modest belongings. He set them aside and knelt before Rebecca, opening a small tin of salve. "This might sting," he warned, "but it will help with the swelling." His fingers were gentle as he applied the pungent ointment to her ankle, then wrapped it carefully in a clean bandage. Rebecca watched his face as he worked, noting the concentration in his expression and the careful precision of his movements. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked. "A lifetime of treating horses led to treating cowboys," he replied with a small smile. "And an old Comanche healer taught me about herbal remedies when I was younger." "You've been a cowboy a long time, since I was 14, he confirmed, securing the bandage. "Started as a ranch hand in Texas, worked my way up to trail drives, and now I'm headed to a new position near Carson City." Rebecca's eyes widened. "Carson City? That's where my father and brother went for supplies. They won't be back for days yet." Ethan's expression grew serious as he considered this information. "You shouldn't be alone with that injury," he said finally. "If you're comfortable with it, I could make camp on your porch until they return." The proper response would have been to decline, to assure him she would be fine on her own. But the memory of the well, the darkness and cold and utter solitude, was too fresh in Rebecca's mind. "I would be grateful if you stayed," she admitted. "There's a spare room my brother uses." "You're welcome to it as thanks for saving my life." Ethan seemed about to decline, then nodded. "Thank you. I'll accept, at least for tonight. We can discuss tomorrow when it comes." He helped Rebecca to her bedroom, then retreated to prepare a simple meal from the supplies in her pantry. Rebecca drifted off to sleep almost immediately. Her last conscious thought one of gratitude for the strange twist of fate that had brought Ethan O'Malley to her rescue. Morning brought pain and stiffness, but also the comforting aroma of coffee and something cooking. Rebecca sat up gingerly, testing her ankle and finding it still too tender to bear weight. She called out, and moments later, Ethan appeared at her bedroom door, a steaming mug in his hand. "Good morning," he said, remaining in the doorway. "I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of preparing breakfast." "Not at all," Rebecca assured him, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I'm finding it hard to mind anything done by the man who saved my life." A hint of color touched Ethan's cheeks at her words. "Anyone would have done the same." "But it wasn't anyone," Rebecca pointed out. "It was you." The days that followed established an unexpected routine. Ethan tended to Rebecca's ankle each morning and evening, applying fresh salve and bandages. He took care of the few animals on the property, a milk cow, some chickens, and Rebecca's old mare, Penny. He chopped wood, repaired a loose shutter, and even ventured to the trading post 5 miles away to fetch additional supplies. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Ethan reading aloud from one of his books while Rebecca mended clothes or simply listened, fascinated by the philosophical ideas he introduced her to. She had always been a keen reader herself, having been taught by her mother, who had been a schoolteacher back east before marrying Rebecca's father. Thoreau says, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." Ethan read one evening, the firelight dancing across his features. "What do you make of that, Miss Zimmerman?" Rebecca considered the question seriously. "I think perhaps he's right for many people. My father came west after my mother died in Illinois. He was desperate in his grief, though he tried to hide it from us children. And you? Have you known desperation?" Rebecca thought of the well, of the moment when she realized no one might find her for days. "Yes," she said softly, "but I've known joy too. I think perhaps Thoreau didn't consider the balance of life, the moments of wonder that make the desperate times bearable. Ethan looked at her with new respect. That's a profound observation. Rebecca smiled. I may be a farmer's daughter in Nevada, Mr. O'Malley, but my mother made sure I received an education. I never doubted your intelligence, Ethan assured her, only appreciated its depth. Such conversations became the highlight of Rebecca's days. She learned that Ethan had left home at 14 after his mother died and his father turned to drink. He had educated himself largely through books purchased or borrowed during his travels, developing a particular fondness for the transcendentalists and their views on nature and self-reliance. In turn, Rebecca shared stories of her childhood in Illinois, her mother's death from pneumonia, and the family's decision to seek a new start in Nevada. She spoke of her dreams to someday have a place of her own, perhaps with a small orchard like the one her grandmother had tended back east. By the fourth day, Rebecca could walk with the aid of a makeshift crutch Ethan had fashioned for her. They ventured outside together, Rebecca breathing deeply of the fresh air, still savoring the simple pleasure of open sky above her after her time in the well. I should go back there, she said suddenly, looking in the direction of the old well. I need to see it to know it's real and I'm truly free of it. Ethan looked concerned but nodded. If you feel it's important, I'll take you, but let me carry you most of the way to spare your ankle. Before Rebecca could protest, Ethan had scooped her into his arms, her crutch tucked under his own arm. She found herself pressed against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, smelling the clean, masculine scent of his soap and leather, and something uniquely Ethan. I can walk part of the way, she insisted, though she made no move to struggle out of his secure hold. Indulge me, Ethan replied with a small smile. I've spent years working with stubborn cattle. A stubborn woman is a welcome change. Rebecca laughed despite herself. I'm not sure that's a compliment, Mr. O'Malley. Ethan, he corrected gently. After sharing fireside philosophy, I think we can dispense with formalities. Ethan, Rebecca repeated, liking the way his name felt on her tongue. Then you must call me Rebecca. They reached the well, Ethan setting Rebecca carefully on her feet and handing her the crutch. She approached the dark opening cautiously, Ethan's steadying hand on her elbow. The broken platform had been replaced by a temporary covering of boards that Ethan had constructed, with a warning sign he'd painted and nailed to a post beside it. Rebecca peered down into the darkness, memories of her time trapped below washing over her. It seems smaller somehow, she said quietly, less monstrous than in my memory. Fear has a way of magnifying things, Ethan observed. It's why a snake at your feet can seem as big as a tree trunk. Have you ever been afraid, Ethan? His hand tightened slightly on her elbow. Many times. During my first cattle drive, a storm spooked the herd. The stampede killed 3 men. I was terrified but had to keep riding. He paused, then added more softly, and I was afraid when I heard your voice coming from this well, afraid I wouldn't be able to get you out safely. Rebecca turned to look at him, struck by his admission. But you did it anyway. Fear doesn't have to stop you, Ethan said simply. It just makes the doing harder. They stood in silence for a moment, the wind rustling the sparse grass around them. Then Rebecca stepped back from the well. I've seen enough. It's just a hole in the ground now, not a prison. Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. Ready to head back? Yes, but I can walk, Rebecca insisted. The ground is level here and I need to prove to myself that I can. Ethan didn't argue but stayed close beside her as they made their slow way back to the house. When they reached the porch, Rebecca was breathing hard from the exertion, but her eyes shone with triumph. I did it, she said, sinking onto the porch swing. You did, Ethan agreed, sitting beside her. You're stronger than you know, Rebecca Zimmerman. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard as they sat together, the swing moving gently back and forth. Rebecca became acutely aware of Ethan's proximity, of the small space between them on the swing, of the warmth radiating from his body. "My father and brother should return tomorrow or the next day," she said, breaking the companionable silence. "Yes," Ethan agreed, his voice neutral. "And your ankle is healing well. You'll be able to manage on your own soon. And you'll continue on to Carson City. That was my plan." Rebecca nodded, trying to ignore the unexpected pang of sadness at the thought of his departure. "The cattle operation their silverage, is it?" "My father knows the owner, Mr. Patterson. He's a fair employer from what I've heard." "That's good to know," Ethan replied. "Though I've learned to form my own opinions of men, regardless of their reputations." "A wise approach," Rebecca agreed. "My mother used to say that reputation is what others think of you, but character is what you truly are. Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was. I think she would have liked you." The words slipped out before Rebecca could consider them, and she felt a blush rising to her cheeks. Ethan turned to look at her, something unreadable in his expression. "I would have been honored to meet her," he said softly. "She raised a remarkable daughter." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. Rebecca found herself holding her breath, uncertain of what might happen next. The moment was broken by the distant lowing of the milk cow, reminding them of evening chores yet to be done. Ethan stood, adjusting his hat. "I should tend to Bessie before she gets too impatient." Rebecca nodded, both relieved and disappointed by the interruption. "I'll start on supper. I'm feeling well enough to cook tonight." That evening they ate the simple meal Rebecca had prepared: cornbread, beans with bacon, and stewed apples by lamplight at the small kitchen table. Their conversation was more stilted than in previous days, each seemingly aware of the approaching end to their unexpected time together. After the meal, Ethan insisted on washing the dishes while Rebecca rested her ankle. When he finished, he joined her by the fire, but instead of reading as had become their custom, he sat in thoughtful silence, staring into the flames. "Is something troubling you?" Rebecca finally asked. Ethan looked up, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about what happens when your family returns." "You'll continue your journey," Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice even. "As planned." "Yes," Ethan agreed, "but I find myself—" He paused, searching for words, reluctant to leave. Rebecca's heart quickened at his admission. "The position in Carson City is a good opportunity." "It is. But opportunities come in many forms." He met her eyes directly. "In just these few days, I've come to admire you greatly, Rebecca. Your courage, your intelligence, your kindness. I know it's sudden and perhaps improper, but I would like your permission to write to you after I reach Carson City." Rebecca couldn't hide her smile. "I would like that very much. And perhaps, if your father approves, I might call on you when I have time away from my duties." "I would like that even more," Rebecca admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's relief was visible. "I feared I might be overstepping. We've known each other such a short time." "Sometimes," Rebecca said, thinking of her mother's whirlwind courtship with her father, "the heart knows quickly what the mind would take months to decide." Ethan smiled then, a full, warm smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Your wisdom continues to impress me, Miss Zimmerman." The next day brought unexpected news. A rider from the trading post delivered a message from Rebecca's father. They had been delayed in Carson City due to a broken wagon axle and wouldn't return for another 3 days at least. Rebecca felt a complicated mix of disappointment at the delayed reunion and pleasure at the extended time with Ethan. As they settled into this unexpected extension of their time together, the awkwardness of the previous evening gave way to a new, comfortable understanding. Ethan continued to help around the property, but now included Rebecca in the work when her ankle permitted, teaching her small skills he'd picked up in his years of traveling: how to mend a bridle with minimal materials, how to predict weather changes by observing animal behavior, how to start a fire with damp wood. In turn, Rebecca shared her knowledge of the local plants, showing Ethan which wild berries were safe to eat and which herbs could be used for cooking or medicine. They worked side by side in the small vegetable garden, Rebecca directing from a stool while Ethan pulled weeds and harvested ripe produce. During these shared activities, they talked about everything and nothing: childhood memories, hopes for the future, opinions on books they'd both read. Rebecca found herself opening up about fears and dreams she'd never shared with anyone, not even her family. "I sometimes wonder if I'll always be just a farmer's daughter," she confessed as they shelled peas on the porch one afternoon. "I love this land, but I've always wondered what lies beyond the horizon." "What would you do if you could do anything?" Ethan asked, his hands continuing their steady work. Rebecca considered the question seriously. "I'd like to teach, as my mother did. But I'd also like to see some of the world first: San Francisco, perhaps, or even back east to Boston or New York." "Why don't you?" "Responsibility," Rebecca said simply. "After Mother died, I became the woman of the house. Father and Thomas need me." "They're fortunate to have you," Ethan said. "But a life unlived becomes a burden, not just to yourself but eventually to those you're trying to serve." Rebecca looked at him curiously. "Is that from one of your books?" Ethan smiled. "No, that's from watching too many bitter old cowboys who stayed too long in jobs they'd grown to hate because they never found the courage to seek what they truly wanted." "And what do you truly want, Ethan O'Malley?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning beyond the simple words. Ethan's hands stilled, and he looked at Rebecca with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Once, I would have said I wanted freedom, open skies, and new horizons," he said slowly. "Now, I find myself wanting something different. Roots, perhaps. A place that feels like home, someone to share it with." The implication was clear, and Rebecca felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. Before she could respond, however, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention to the road. 2 riders appeared, moving at a steady pace toward the house. Rebecca stood, shading her eyes against the sun, then broke into a wide smile. "It's Father and Thomas," she exclaimed. "They're early." Ethan rose as well, automatically adjusting his vest and checking that his appearance was presentable. Rebecca noticed the gesture and realized with sudden clarity that Ethan was nervous about meeting her family, a man who had faced stampeding cattle and survived, who knew what other dangers, anxious about meeting a farmer and his teenage son. "They'll like you," she assured him softly. "How could they not when you saved my life?" Ethan nodded, but remained tense as the riders approached and dismounted in the yard. Rebecca's father, Harold Zimmerman, was a tall, lean man with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent decades working outdoors. Thomas, at 18, was already nearly as tall as his father but retained a youthful lankiness that spoke of recent growth. "Rebecca," Harold called, striding toward the porch with a smile that faltered when he noticed her bandaged ankle and the crutch leaning against the railing. "What happened?" Rebecca made her way carefully down the porch steps, accepting her father's supportive arm. "There was an accident at the old well," she explained. "The platform gave way and I fell in." Harold's face paled. "The well? But how did you get out? How long were you down there?" 2 days, Rebecca admitted, and I wouldn't have gotten out at all if not for Mr. O'Malley here." She gestured to Ethan, who stepped forward and extended his hand to Harold. "Ethan O'Malley, sir. I was passing through on my way to Carson City when I heard your daughter calling for help." Harold gripped Ethan's hand firmly. "Mr. O'Malley, I don't know how to thank you. My daughter is everything to me and Thomas." "No thanks necessary, sir. Anyone would have done the same." Thomas, who had been securing the horses, joined them. "But no one else did," he pointed out, offering his own hand to Ethan. "Thank you for saving my sister, Mr. O'Malley." The introductions complete, Harold insisted they all go inside so he could hear the full story. Over coffee and the remaining cornbread from the previous night, Rebecca recounted her ordeal, with Ethan occasionally adding details about the rescue. She downplayed the danger and discomfort of her time in the well, but her father's experienced eyes noted the lingering shadows beneath her eyes and the way she unconsciously rubbed her arms as she spoke of the cold nights. "You've been caring for her all this time?" Harold asked Ethan when the tale was complete. "Yes, sir. I couldn't in good conscience leave her alone with an injured ankle and no one to help with the daily chores." Harold studied the younger man thoughtfully. "And you were headed to Carson City, to the silverage operation?" "That's right," Ethan confirmed. "I have a position waiting as a foreman." "Foreman?" Harold raised his eyebrows, impressed. "You must have considerable experience." 17 years working cattle in various capacities," Ethan said simply. "I started young." The conversation continued through dinner, which Rebecca insisted on helping prepare despite her father's protests. Ethan offered to leave now that her family had returned, but Harold wouldn't hear of it. "You'll stay the night at least," he insisted. "Rest your horse and yourself. It's the least we can offer after what you've done for our Rebecca." Later, as Rebecca prepared for bed, there was a knock at her bedroom door. She opened it to find her father standing there, his expression thoughtful. "May I come in for a moment?" he asked. Rebecca nodded, sitting on the edge of her bed as her father took the room's single chair. "This young man, O'Malley," Harold began. "He seems honorable." "He is, father," Rebecca confirmed. "More than honorable. He's kind, intelligent, hard-working." Harold smiled at the warmth in his daughter's voice. "I can see that you think highly of him." Rebecca blushed slightly but met her father's eyes. "I do. In these few days I've come to know him well. He's a good man." "And he feels the same about you." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. "He's asked permission to write to me after he reaches Carson City, and to call on me when his duties allow." Harold considered this information. "Carson City is not so far," he said finally. "A day's hard ride, less by train." "No, not so far," Rebecca agreed, hope rising in her chest at her father's thoughtful rather than prohibitive tone. "Your mother would say that fate works in mysterious ways," Harold continued, his voice softening at the mention of his late wife. "That perhaps your misfortune at the well was actually fortune in disguise." "You believe that?" Rebecca asked. Harold smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "I believe that good people deserve happiness, and you, my dear, deserve it more than most." He stood, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "I'll speak with Mr. O'Malley in the morning." Rebecca slept peacefully that night, secure in the knowledge that her father approved of Ethan. In the morning she rose early, eager to join the men for breakfast, but found only Thomas in the kitchen. "Where are father and Ethan?" she asked, trying not to sound overly concerned. Thomas gestured vaguely toward the door. "They went out walking at dawn. Father said something about wanting to show Mr. O'Malley the property." Rebecca busied herself preparing breakfast, trying not to speculate about what the two men might be discussing. When they finally returned, both looked serious but not uncomfortable with each other. Breakfast passed pleasantly, with Thomas regaling them with stories of their adventures in Carson City. Afterward, Ethan announced that he should be on his way if he wanted to reach his destination by nightfall. "I've already imposed on your family's hospitality long enough," he said, though his eyes lingered on Rebecca. "Nonsense," Harold replied. "You're welcome here any time, O'Malley. In fact, I insist you return when you can." Ethan nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "Thank you, sir. I intend to do just that." The time for goodbyes came all too quickly. Thomas and Harold tactfully made themselves busy with the newly purchased supplies, leaving Ethan and Rebecca a moment of privacy on the porch. "Your father is a good man," Ethan said, adjusting Clementine's saddle. "We had a long talk this morning." "About what?" Rebecca asked, trying to sound casual. Ethan turned to face her, his expression serious but his eyes warm. "About you, about my intentions. About whether a cowboy with little to his name besides a good horse and some dog-eared books could possibly be worthy of a woman like you." Rebecca's heart pounded in her chest. "And what conclusion did you reach?" "That I'm not worthy," Ethan said with a small smile, "but that I intend to work every day to become so, if you'll allow me the chance." "I think," Rebecca said carefully, "that worth isn't measured in possessions or status but in character and heart. And by those measures, Ethan O'Malley, you are rich indeed." Ethan's smile broadened. "Your father has given me permission to court you properly, Rebecca. I'll write as soon as I'm settled at Silveridge, and I'll visit when I can. It won't be easy with the distance and my responsibilities, but nothing worth having comes without effort," Rebecca finished for him. Ethan nodded, then reached out to take her hand, his touch warm and strong. "May I?" he asked softly. Rebecca nodded, her breath catching as Ethan raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Until I see you again," he promised. Rebecca watched as Ethan mounted Clementine and rode away, turning once to wave before disappearing over the rise. She stood on the porch long after he had gone, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched it, her heart full of a new and precious hope. The weeks that followed were filled with work and waiting. Rebecca's ankle healed completely, allowing her to resume her full share of the household duties. The old well was properly covered with a new, sturdy platform, though Rebecca avoided it whenever possible, preferring to use the newer well closer to the house. Ethan's first letter arrived 3 weeks after his departure, carried by a fellow cowboy traveling through the area. Rebecca read it by lamplight in the privacy of her room, savoring every word. He wrote of his new position at Silveridge, of the challenges and satisfactions of managing the cattle operation. He described the people he worked with, the cook who made the best sourdough biscuits west of the Mississippi, the young wrangler who had a gift with difficult horses, the old trail hand who told improbable stories of his adventures. But more than these details, Ethan wrote of his feelings. With an eloquence that surprised and moved Rebecca, he described how thoughts of her sustained him through long days of work, how the memory of her smile came to him in quiet moments, how he counted the days until he might see her again. Rebecca wrote back immediately, sending her letter with the next supply wagon headed toward Carson City. She told Ethan of her daily life, the vegetable garden now producing abundantly, Thomas's growing interest in engineering, her father's plans to expand their wheat fields. She shared her thoughts on the latest book she was reading, a novel by Jane Austen that had finally reached their local trading post after months of waiting. And with a boldness that sometimes surprised her, Rebecca wrote of her own feelings, how the house seemed emptier without Ethan's presence, how she found herself looking toward Carson City whenever she was outdoors, how she treasured the memory of those few days they had spent together. A month after his departure, True to his word, Ethan returned for a visit. He arrived on a Saturday morning, looking tired but happy after the long ride from Carson City. Rebecca spotted him from the garden where she was harvesting late summer vegetables and ran to meet him, propriety momentarily forgotten in her joy. Ethan dismounted quickly, catching Rebecca in a brief embrace before remembering himself and stepping back, tipping his hat formally as Harold emerged from the barn. "Mr. Zimmerman," he greeted Rebecca's father, "thank you for allowing me to visit." Harold shook Ethan's hand warmly. "You're always welcome here, O'Malley. Come inside and rest. You look like you've been riding all night." "Since before dawn," Ethan admitted. "I wanted to make the most of my 2 days away from Silveridge." The visit passed too quickly for Rebecca's liking. Ethan joined the family for meals, helped Harold and Thomas with some repairs to the barn roof, and even attended Sunday services with them at the small church in the nearest town. But the moments Rebecca treasured most were the quiet conversations they shared on the porch swing in the evenings, Harold dozing in his chair nearby, providing the necessary chaperonage while allowing them some semblance of privacy. During these conversations, their relationship deepened beyond the initial attraction and admiration. Rebecca learned of Ethan's difficult childhood with an alcoholic father, his dreams of someday having a ranch of his own, his silent promise to his late mother that he would make something of himself. In turn, she shared her memories of her mother, her occasional feelings of being trapped by circumstances, her love for the land despite its hardships. Ethan listened with genuine interest, offering comfort when she spoke of losses, encouragement when she mentioned dreams. On the evening before Ethan's departure, they sat closer than usual on the swing, their hands nearly touching. Harold had gone inside to help Thomas with a mathematics problem, leaving them momentarily alone. "I have something for you," Ethan said, reaching into his vest pocket. He withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Rebecca accepted it with surprise. "You didn't need to bring me a gift." "I wanted to," Ethan said simply. "Open it." Rebecca carefully untied the string and unwrapped the paper, revealing a small leather-bound book of poetry. "Whitman," she read from the cover. "I've heard of him but never read his work." "He writes about America, about the land and its people," Ethan explained. "About possibility. I thought you might enjoy his perspective." Rebecca opened the book carefully, noting a pressed wildflower marking one page. "You've marked a passage," Ethan nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "A few lines that made me think of you." Rebecca turned to the marked page and read aloud softly. "We were together, I forget the rest." She looked up at Ethan, her eyes shining. "It's beautiful. It's true," Ethan said quietly. "When I'm with you, everything else fades away." The space between them seemed to disappear as they leaned toward each other, drawn by an irresistible force. Their lips met in a gentle, tentative kiss, brief but filled with promise. When they parted, Rebecca felt a warmth that began where their lips had touched and spread throughout her entire body. "I should go in," she whispered, though she made no move to leave. "Father will be back any moment." "You should," Ethan agreed, equally motionless. The creak of the door breaking the spell, and they moved apart as Harold rejoined them on the porch, seemingly oblivious to the momentous event that had just occurred. The following morning brought another parting, this one even harder than the first. As Ethan mounted Clementine, he looked down at Rebecca with an expression that made her heart ache with both happiness and longing. 6 weeks, he promised. "I'll be back in 6 weeks, if not sooner." And so the pattern was established. Ethan visited whenever his duties at Silveridge allowed, usually staying for a weekend every 6 to 8 weeks. Letters traveled back and forth between visits, growing increasingly affectionate and open. Winter came to Nevada, making travel more difficult, but Ethan still managed to visit for Christmas, bringing modest gifts for the entire Zimmerman family and spending 3 precious days with them during a rare break from his responsibilities. Spring brought new challenges and possibilities. During his April visit, Ethan arrived with news that changed the course of their relationship. "Mr. Patterson is expanding the operation," he told Rebecca as they walked through the newly planted fields, Harold watching from a respectful distance. "He's purchased land closer to the California border for a second herd." "That sounds like a good opportunity for silverage," Rebecca observed, noting the excitement in Ethan's voice. "It is, and for me as well." Ethan stopped walking, turning to face her. "He's offered me the position of managing the new property. It would mean more responsibility, a significant increase in pay, and—" He paused, his expression serious. "A house of my own on the property." Rebecca's heart quickened at the implication. "Your own house." "A small one," Ethan clarified. "But yes, with 2 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, even a small study where I could keep my books." He took her hands in his. "Rebecca, it's still a day's ride from here, but it's a place I could call my own, a place where I could—" He took a deep breath. "Where I could bring a wife." Rebecca felt as though the spring breeze might lift her off her feet. "Ethan, are you—" "Not yet," he said quickly. "Not officially. I wanted to tell you about this opportunity first, to make sure you understand what life would be like. It's isolated, the work is hard, and you'd be far from your family." Rebecca squeezed his hands. "But we'd be together." Ethan's face lit up with hope. "Yes, we would," he gestured toward Harold. "I've already spoken to your father about my intentions. He's given his blessing, provided it's what you truly want." "It is," Rebecca said without hesitation. "It's what I want more than anything." Ethan nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then I'll return in June when the new position begins and the house is ready, and I'll ask you properly then." The next 2 months were a blur of preparations and anticipation. Rebecca sewed new dresses, learned new recipes, and pored over the few homemaking guides available at the trading post. Harold taught her additional skills he thought might be useful: how to repair simple tools, how to handle a rifle for protection, how to manage household accounts. Thomas teased her about her dreamy expressions but helped in his own way, carving a beautiful jewelry box as a gift for her new home. The community, upon hearing of the likely engagement, contributed advice and small gifts: preserved fruits, crocheted doilies, a handmade quilt from the church ladies' circle. June arrived with unusual heat, the Nevada sun beating down on the ripening fields. Rebecca counted the days until Ethan's expected arrival, trying to contain her excitement and focus on her daily tasks. When his scheduled day came and went with no sign of him, she told herself that his new responsibilities had simply delayed him. 3 days later, as Rebecca was hanging laundry to dry, she spotted a rider approaching, not Ethan on Clementine, but a stranger on an unfamiliar horse. The man rode directly to the house, where Harold met him on the porch. Rebecca couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw her father's posture stiffen, his hand rise to cover his mouth in what appeared to be shock. Dropping the wet sheet back into the basket, Rebecca hurried toward the house, dread building with each step. By the time she reached the porch, the rider was already leaving, and her father stood with a letter in his hand, his face ashen. "Father, what is it? What's happened?" Harold looked at his daughter with pain-filled eyes. "It's Ethan. There was an accident at Silveridge." Rebecca felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Is he dead?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "No," Harold said quickly, "but he's been badly injured. A bull gored him while he was moving the herd to the new property." Rebecca's legs weakened and she sank onto the porch steps. "How badly?" The letter doesn't say specifically, only that he's at the doctor's house in Carson City and that his condition is serious. Rebecca stood suddenly, determination replacing shock. We have to go to him. Harold nodded, already moving toward the barn. I'll hitch the wagon. We can be in Carson City by tomorrow evening if we leave within the hour. The journey to Carson City was the longest of Rebecca's life. The wagon jolted over rough terrain, each bump a reminder of the distance still to cover. They stopped only when absolutely necessary, pushing the horses as much as they dared. Thomas had stayed behind to tend the farm, promising to pray for Ethan's recovery. They reached Carson City as the sun was setting the following day, tired and dusty from the journey. Harold had been to the town several times for supplies and knew the location of Dr. Bennett's house, which served as the town's hospital in the absence of a proper medical facility. The doctor's wife, a kind-faced woman with graying hair, met them at the door. "You must be Miss Zimmerman," she said, noting Rebecca's anxious expression. "He's been asking for you. Then he's awake. He's speaking." Rebecca felt hope surge through her. "Sometimes," Mrs. Bennett replied cautiously. "The fever comes and goes, but he's young and strong, and Dr. Bennett is optimistic." She led them through the house to a small room at the back, where a single bed held Ethan's motionless form. Rebecca's breath caught at the sight of him, pale, bandaged, his normally vibrant presence diminished by injury. A large bandage wrapped his torso, spotted with blood despite obviously being recently changed. "Ethan," she whispered, moving to his bedside. His eyelids fluttered at the sound of her voice, then opened slowly. "Rebecca!" His voice was weak, barely audible. "You came." "Of course I came," she said, taking his hand carefully in hers. "Did you think I wouldn't?" A ghost of his usual smile touched his lips. "Hoped you would, didn't want you to see me like this." "Hush," Rebecca said gently. "Save your strength, Doctor." Bennett entered then, a tall man with spectacles and a serious demeanor. He introduced himself to Harold, then explained Ethan's condition in clinical terms: 2 broken ribs, a punctured lung, significant blood loss, and a deep wound to his left side where the bull's horn had entered. "He's fortunate," the doctor concluded. "The horn missed his vital organs by inches. Had it struck slightly to the right, he wouldn't have survived long enough to reach me." "Will he recover fully?" Harold asked, voicing the question Rebecca couldn't bring herself to ask. "Doctor." Bennett adjusted his spectacles. "It's too early to say with certainty. The immediate danger is infection. If we can prevent that, his chances improve significantly. But he'll have a long convalescence ahead of him, and he may always bear some weakness on his left side." Rebecca barely heard the doctor's words. Her focus remained on Ethan, on the rise and fall of his chest, on the warmth of his hand in hers, on the life still present despite his injuries. "I'll stay with him," she declared, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "Doctor." Bennett looked to Harold, who nodded his agreement. "My daughter is quite capable, Doctor. If you and your wife are willing to have her as a guest, I believe it would benefit both her and Mr. O'Malley." Arrangements were quickly made. Harold would return to the farm to assist Thomas, while Rebecca would remain in Carson City, staying in a small room at the boarding house across the street, but spending her days at Ethan's bedside. Mrs. Bennett, herself a former nurse during the war between the states, offered to teach Rebecca how to change bandages and assist with Ethan's care. The first week was the most difficult. Ethan's fever spiked repeatedly, sometimes causing him to delirious. During these episodes, Rebecca learned fragments of his past. He had never shared memories of his mother's death, conflicts with his father, a drowning incident in his youth that had left him terrified of deep water. She also heard him call her name, over and over, as if she were a lifeline he was reaching for in his fevered state. During one particularly bad night, when Dr. Bennett feared they might lose him, Ethan clutched Rebecca's hand and whispered, "Don't leave me." "Never," she promised, her tears falling onto their joined hands. "I'm right here, Ethan. Stay with me." Whether it was Rebecca's presence, Dr. Bennett's medical skill, or Ethan's own determination, the fever broke on the 8th day. Ethan opened his eyes, clear and aware for the first time since the accident, and recognized Rebecca immediately. "You're still here," he said, his voice weak but steady. Rebecca smiled through her tears. "I told you I wouldn't leave." Recovery came slowly. Ethan chafed at his weakness and the confines of the sick room, but Rebecca's presence made the long days bearable. She read to him from his favorite books, brought news from town, and later, as he grew stronger, helped him take short walks around Dr. Bennett's garden. Mr. Patterson, the owner of Silveridge, visited regularly, assuring Ethan that his position would be waiting for him when he recovered. The new property was being managed temporarily by another hand, but Patterson made it clear that the opportunity was still Ethan's if he wanted it. "The house is finished," Patterson told them during one visit. "Small but solid, just as we discussed. And the land is good, plenty of grass for the cattle, a creek that runs year-round, views of the mountains to the west." Ethan thanked his employer but made no commitments. Later, when they were alone, Rebecca asked why. "I'm not the same man who was offered that position," Ethan said, looking down at his still thin body. "Dr. Bennett says I may never regain my full strength. What if I can't manage the property properly? What if I can't provide for—" He stopped abruptly. "For a wife," Rebecca finished gently. "For me." Ethan nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "I had such plans, Rebecca. A good position, a home of my own, a future to offer you. Now I don't know what I can promise." Rebecca took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Ethan O'Malley, do you remember what you told me by the well? That fear doesn't have to stop you, it just makes the doing harder." A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. "Using my own words against me." "When they're the right words, yes." Rebecca's expression grew serious. "I didn't fall in love with you because of a position at Silveridge or a house or any material thing you could provide. I fell in love with you because of who you are, your courage, your kindness, your mind." "None of that has changed." Ethan covered her hands with his. "You deserve so much more than a broken cowboy." "I deserve the man I choose," Rebecca said firmly. "And I choose you, broken ribs, uncertain future and all." Ethan's eyes shone with a mixture of love and lingering doubt. "You're sure?" In answer, Rebecca leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her certainty and love into the gesture. When they parted, Ethan's doubt had been replaced with determination. "Then I have something to ask you," he said, reaching for a small pouch that sat on his bedside table. From it, he withdrew a simple gold ring. "I had this with me when the accident happened. I was bringing it to you." Rebecca's heart pounded as Ethan took her hand. "Rebecca Zimmerman, will you marry me?" "Not when I'm fully recovered, not when the future is certain, but now as we are, with whatever life brings us." "Yes," Rebecca said without hesitation. "Today, tomorrow, always yes." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Carson City, with Harold and Thomas making the journey from Dry Creek for the ceremony. Dr. and Mrs. Bennett stood as witnesses, along with Mr. Patterson, and several hands from Silveridge who had come to support their injured foreman. Rebecca wore a simple cream-colored dress she had purchased in Carson City, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Ethan, still thin but standing straight and proud, wore his best shirt and a new vest, a gift from Mr. Patterson. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan's kiss was gentle but filled with promise. The reception was held at the hotel dining room, a modest affair with cake and punch and well wishes from those in attendance. Mr. Patterson approached the newlyweds with a surprising offer. "The house at the new property is ready," he said, "but I understand if you're not prepared to take on full management duties yet, O'Malley. I have a proposition for you both." He explained that he needed someone to live on the property immediately, to establish a presence and oversee basic operations. The more strenuous work could be handled by visiting hands from the main silverage operation until Ethan was fully recovered. It would mean a reduced salary initially, Patterson admitted, but the house would be yours and you could take on more responsibilities as your strength returns. Ethan looked at Rebecca, who nodded encouragingly. "We accept," he said, extending his hand to Patterson. "And I promise you won't regret giving me this chance." They departed for their new home the following day, traveling in a wagon borrowed from Dr. Bennett, loaded with wedding gifts and the few possessions they had between them. The journey took most of the day, following the Carson River southwest toward the California border. When they finally crested a rise and saw the small house in the distance, Rebecca felt a surge of emotion. It was modest by any standard, a single-story wooden structure with a porch across the front, a small barn behind it, and a corral for horses. But it was theirs, a place to begin their life together. Ethan halted the wagon, turning to Rebecca with a smile. "What do you think?" "It's perfect," she said honestly. "Absolutely perfect." In the weeks that followed, they established their new home and routine. Rebecca planted a garden, arranged their few possessions, and made curtains from fabric purchased in Carson City. Ethan, still regaining his strength, focused on light duties, maintaining records, planning grazing rotations, and spending short periods each day working with the small herd that had been placed under his care. Hands from the main silverage operation visited regularly, helping with the more strenuous tasks and reporting back to Mr. Patterson on the property's progress. Ethan chafed at his limitations but followed Dr. Bennett's instructions faithfully, knowing that a full recovery depended on not pushing himself too quickly. Rebecca wrote to her father and brother weekly, describing their new life and inviting them to visit when the harvest was complete. Harold responded with his own letters, full of news from Dry Creek and advice on managing a household. As summer turned to fall, Ethan's strength returned steadily. By October, he was able to spend full days in the saddle, though he still tired more quickly than before the accident. The wound on his side had healed into a puckered scar, a permanent reminder of how close he had come to death. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple, Ethan put his arm around Rebecca and drew her close. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Marrying me before I was fully recovered, taking on all the work of establishing this place." Rebecca leaned into his embrace. "Not for a single moment. This life, our life, is everything I hoped for, even though it's hard. Even though we're miles from town, with only occasional visitors." "Especially because of those things," Rebecca replied. "They're ours to face together." Ethan's hand moved to rest gently on her stomach, which had just begun to show the first subtle signs of the child they were expecting in late spring. "And soon there will be 3 of us to face them." Rebecca covered his hand with her own. "The child of a brave cowboy and a woman who survived 2 days in a well. I think he or she will be quite resilient." "Like their mother," Ethan said, kissing the top of her head. "And their father," Rebecca added. "The man who climbed down a rope to save a stranger, not knowing he was really saving his future wife." Ethan smiled at the memory. "I knew there was something special about you the moment I heard your voice calling from that well. I just didn't know then that it was calling me home." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, Rebecca thought about the winding path that had led them here, a broken well platform, a chance passing of a cowboy with good hearing, a bull's horn that had missed vital organs by inches. Fate, her mother would have called it. Or perhaps, as Ethan might say, quoting one of his beloved philosophers, it was simply the universe conspiring to bring together two people who belonged with each other. Whatever it was, Rebecca was grateful for it all, even those terrifying days trapped in the darkness. For without that fall, she might never have risen to this happiness. Spring arrived with its promise of renewal, painting the Nevada landscape with wildflowers and fresh green grass. The cattle grew fat on the abundant forage, and the creek that ran through the property gurgled with snowmelt from the distant mountains. On a clear April morning, as the sun cast long shadows across the land, Rebecca gave birth to a healthy son. They named him William Harold O'Malley, honoring both Ethan's grandfather and Rebecca's father. The baby had Ethan's hazel eyes and Rebecca's determined chin, a perfect blend of his parents. Mr. Patterson, visiting the property to check on the spring calving, brought a hand-carved cradle as a gift. Harold and Thomas arrived a week after the birth, Harold's eyes filling with tears when he held his grandson for the first time. "Your mother would be so proud," he told Rebecca as they sat together on the porch, the baby sleeping peacefully in his grandfather's arms. "Of the family you've created, of the woman you've become." "I wish she could have known Ethan and William," Rebecca said softly. "She knows," Harold assured her, gazing down at his grandson's face. "Somehow she knows." That evening, after her family had retired to the small guest room and the baby was settled in his cradle, Ethan took Rebecca's hand and led her outside. The night was mild, the sky ablaze with stars that seemed close enough to touch. "I have something for you," Ethan said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I've been saving for this since before William was born." Rebecca opened the pouch to find a delicate gold locket. Inside was a tiny daguerreotype of Ethan holding their newborn son, their first family portrait taken by a traveling photographer who had passed through the previous week. "It's beautiful," Rebecca whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Perfect." Ethan fastened the locket around her neck, his fingers brushing her skin. "I promised myself years ago that if I ever had a family of my own, I'd do better than my father did. I'd make sure my wife and children always knew how much they mean to me." "We know," Rebecca assured him, leaning into his embrace. "We've always known." They stood together under the vast Nevada sky, their home behind them, their future spread before them like the endless prairie. From the darkness of a well to the heights of happiness, their journey had been unexpected but perfect in its own way. And somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon, a wild, free sound that echoed across the land. They now called home the land where a cowboy had once climbed down a rope and brought up not just a trapped woman, but his own heart's desire.